A very good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to PAC TV. This is the Wake Up Call. I am your host, Christy Callising. Glad to be in your company this morning. Of course, so much has happened over the past few days. We've seen the appointment, rather the first appointment of a female president for the Trinidad and Tobago Teachers Unified Association, or TUTA, Ms. Antonia de Freitas. She has been successfully appointed as the new TUTA president. And last week we would have also seen some workers from the port staying away from duties, and this morning we have to explain a little bit more about that situation. We have joining us on the line right now, I have the president of the SWWTU, Mr. Michael Annisette. Good morning to you, Mr. Annisette.
Yeah, pleasant morning to you and the listening public.
How are you this morning?
Pleasant morning to Trinidad and Tobago. Well, as you know, I'm attending a conference here in Antigua.
Yes, yeah.
Trying to get some work for our hotel and catering staff and maritime workers. So we are discussing the whole question of how do we, as the ITF, International Federation, address the Caribbean specific issues. So it's a Caribbean meeting, but we have the executive and leaders from the various ITF departments here with us. And we are trying to map out an approach in terms of how we empower the trade unions in the Caribbean region and make them more relevant.
Yeah.
And how we address the issues of work and all the other issues that is facing the Caribbean region.
And how has preparations for that event been coming along so far?
Yeah, well, the meetings, it has been successful to date. We have done a lot of what I want to call analysis in terms of identifying who the issues are and how the trade union movement from a Caribbean level can put our collective wisdom together, how we can work as one body to address the issues. What is striking is that most of the problems are common problems. So even though you are in Antigua, if you're in Trinidad, if you're in Guyana, if you're in Jamaica, if you're in the Bahamas, if you're in St. Kitts, if you're from Dominica, and I'm just calling some of the countries that is at the conference presently,
yeah.
The cry of the representatives is basically the same.
Wow. And
so then we have what here. It is a Caribbean issue, and it raises several questions in terms of what the leadership, I'm talking now about the political leadership, is talking about, what they are doing actually about really making the Caribbean a unitary state. I'll give you one example which was striking. The price to travel within the Caribbean region is astronomical. You can go to Miami in some instances, which is much cheaper, which is a 4.5 hours done to go to the Caribbean region.
I know that has been something that not just political leaders or CARICOM members have been vocal about. If you look at any social media platform, and I know many of the younger ones would agree with me this morning, that there has actually been a thread on Twitter stating, we need to do something about these the prices in terms of traveling inter-island in the Caribbean. And I do hope that at some point in time, something can be done to lower these prices.
Yeah, well, we are addressing that issue as I speak to you.
That is fantastic.
All right, because that is something that is on the table, and we are also looking at the whole question of the sea. I wouldn't want to say the sea bridge, but what mechanism we can use for transporting passengers, cars, goods and services by way of the sea. Because one would have remembered years ago, we had the Western corporation that was charged with that kind of
Yeah, yeah,
responsibility.
yeah.
And I think that given technology, given the fact that you have your fast ferries, you know, those issues are issues that needs to be put back on the table. I mean, I came to Antigua and I had to fill out a form as a Caribbean person to right to pass through the Caribbean. And
Wow.
if I go to Europe and I land in Switzerland, for example, or Germany, I can now go through any one of the European countries with just my passport. And it raises serious questions in
Yeah.
our minds in the context of the commitment of leadership and in the context of how are we really serious as a Caribbean region
And it brings
in
into
moving
question,
forward.
it also brings into question regional integration when it comes down to
Ye-
trade and the barriers we have in terms of moving freely into island in the Caribbean.
Yeah, in Thailand. Yeah. While there has been a level of agreement as far as that is concerned, it doesn't go far enough because the movement of Caribbean people within the Caribbean region is limited to a
Yeah.
few groups of people, which, in my view, doesn't make sense. The issue we are also discussing is the issue of food security within the Caribbean region, because there is so many lands. Let us look at Guyana in terms of the population and the land that Ghana have. Why can't we collectively get together and then make Guyana, for example, the place where we do all our planting and growing our foods and make it distributional to the rest of the region? I mean, we import 90% of the goods that we eat in
Yes,
Trinidad.
unfortunately.
90%. Yeah. You know, and those are things I think that we have to pay attention to as a region. Those things are critical as we move forward in this new global place and these new global markets. We are seeing what is happening, but we are unable as a region today, notwithstanding the Shagarama's declaration, all
Yeah.
right, to come together as a body and really work in the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the wider region, because we cannot do it on our own as a Caribbean country. We are just a speck within the global market, and therefore we must be able to understand that we have to collectivize our approach in when we do it business for the betterment of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is what we are trying to address as I speak to you in Antigua as the trade union movement. And incidentally, we will be having the Caribbean Congress of Labor Conference in Trinidad and Tobago from the 30th to the 2nd of November. And this will be a follow-up discussions to what we are having here, because the Caribbean Congress of Labor is a body of a federation of all unions within the Caribbean region, and therefore we'll be having those discussions in Trinidad and Tobago. And I think I will be able to speak to you all at the end of that conference too, in terms of what was the outcome.
Yeah. And I just want to go back a bit about what you were talking just now about food security. I just literally just pulled up the food import bill for last year, and it's US $8.9 billion. That is $56 billion TT. And that's a huge amount.
Yeah, come on. but by any stretch of the imagination, that is something. But you see, and again, it brings us to the question that the trade union movement have been raising, that there is a growing gap in terms of the wealth in Trinidad and Tobago. There's an income gap. And when you have that kind of distortion, you're going to see people pallets is being tasted, and they go to the higher tasting food stuff. They import everything.
Yeah.
But is it what we want in Trinidad and Tobago? Is it better for Trinidad and Tobago to have that kind of taste? And it brings us back, and you could tie it into the question of the foreign exchange. Because do we really need, because that requires foreign exchange.
Yeah.
Do we really need that to spend so much money on foreign exchange, right, by importing goods and services, when we could look at minimizing it by doing it within the Caribbean region, which would be much, much cheaper, and then therefore save the foreign exchange to input it into what I want to call more productive measures, so that the country in effect will benefit from it. Because when you import food, the country does not benefit. The only persons who benefit are the people who ship the foodstuffs and the goods to Trinidad and Tobago, and that's an economic reality. And that is something that we have to grapple with. We have to stop talking about it, and we have to start to do things about it. To mitigate it.
Mr. Annisette, just outside of this now, I want to touch briefly on last Friday's action by the port workers. I understand that there was a go-slow or a work stoppage at the port due to many issues, including the failed negotiations, working conditions. What is the latest happening with the workers there?
All right, as I speak to you, the workers are back to work. There was a commitment given by the management of the Port Authority when I met with them that they needed some time in order to meet with the government and the minister responsible for the port, and to convince the CPO for the need to give the directive for us to implement the negotiation that was settled between the board and the management. And I wish to remind the general public that this was signed off on the 2015. And contrary to what the Honorable Minister would have said when he did his interview, because someone sent me the link, it is unfortunate that the Honorable Minister will go on the television and make it appear that this deal was done just before the elections. And that is so far from the truth, in that those discussions were ongoing discussions over a period of time. It wasn't something that just come up on the day of the election and say, let us sign off this quickly because election coming. No. And I also want to advise the Honorable Minister that the minister at the time, Minister Cadiz, was also involved in the discussions by way of the union meeting and treating with him. Having said that, the minister failed to appreciate and to understand that the 12% was conditioned on certain conditionalities, which would have seen the port, had the agreement been implemented, you would have seen the port in a place where the port would have been much better off financially. And I dare say that the port would have been in a position to independently, in terms of finance, address some of the issues. Because what we did was to address the overtime, as the minister spoke of. And we agreed to go 5 and 7. We agreed to have new work practices. We agreed to look at the international benchmark as it relates to gang sizes and to implement that. And there was several other issues that we agreed with. And when one puts that in its totality, it would have meant that the port would have been in a better place financially to address some of the issues. But our failure to sign off and implement the agreement, and when I say sign off, I mean the CPO, because the minister is making it appear, well, it's the CPO. It's not the CPO. Everybody knows that the CPO is just the secretariat for on behalf of the government and the minister. So it is really distorting the facts. All right, because as I pointed out, the Panama Canal was open. The governments were aware that the Panama Canal was opening. And the last time that we had any investment on the port to make the port ready, or as we said in the maritime industry, to develop the operational infrastructure in readiness for the growth that the Panama Canal would have realized. You needed investment. To date, there hasn't been one investment on the port to speak to that growth that has happened as a consequence of the opening of the Panama Canal. But more importantly, that Jamaica, whose economy is not like our economy, the Bahamas and several other Caribbean countries would have invested in their port in that recognition. And the question you have to ask yourself, if the port is the gateway, and the port is the gateway for our commerce and our economy, because we import goods and services, and it's only by sea you can bring in goods and services. As anybody knows who is in commerce and who is involved in the port, internationally, 90% of the goods in the world goes through ports, and ports is a critical artery for your economic development. If you stifle that artery, if you don't take care of that artery, you're going to get what I will want to call an economic heart attack, and your economy is going to die. That is the reality. And the question, and we in the SWWTU, we recognize that, and therefore we would have engaged the management. We would have given a commitment to the management and the board that the union is prepared to work with the management in order to take the port to the place that we have to be for the very existence, one, of the port, and two, for the very survival of our economy. Because we recognize when there is unproductivity, when there is what you will want to call efficiency and effectiveness in terms of doing business on the port, it affects the economy.
Yeah, it does.
Because the port business is time. Time means money. And if we are not efficient and productive, we interfere with our economy, and we also create problems for the shippers who will stay in the port of Port of Spain longer than it is anticipated.
Yeah.
And finally, there's a major transshipment trade. That is the trade that keeps the port ticking away. And therefore, if we do anything by failure of the workers, the management, and the government to pay particular attention to that reality, it means that the port is going to crumble and the port is going to die, because the very existence of the port is on the basis of the volume of transshipment cargo that we can attract and the manner in which we handle and work efficiently. And that's a reality that the union has accepted. That is a reality that we have been trying to work with the management with. And let me add something that people may recall. One would have recalled about 2 or 3 years ago, I would have made a statement that given the age demographic of port workers, that the port should be given a golden handshake, the port workers. And we had that included in the collective agreement. And at that time, you were looking at between 400 or more workers that would have been given, 5 years ago, a golden handshake with their pension benefits rights secured. Had we done that, it means that you would have had a head count drop, which would have then made the wage bill less onerous on the port, and thereby the port would have had the kind of flexibility in terms of that saving to invest in the equipment that hasn't been invested from since 2007. Does the public know that the last investment on the port, which is the major artery of your commerce, the last investment was in 2006 to 2007?
Wow.
We have not had any major investment thereafter. Do we know that port workers are working in situations where the life cycle of the equipment is 45% beyond the life cycle? Where do you hear those kinds of things in a modern port? But in Jamaica, whose economy is less than Trinidad and Tobago, it is not the same. They invest in equipment and they invest in their workers. And all we are simply saying, come on, we want to work with the government, we want to work with the management. We cannot politicize this. It has nothing to do with Michael Annisette or Siemens Union. We need to deal with it. And I want to raise one question. I would like the public and I would like you to do the analysis. What is the cause of the sea bridge? Because of the moving of the fast ferry, the Galicia, that was done under Honorable Minister Sininan. What has that caused Trinidad and Tobago? Because of the refusal of the minister to accede to the request of several different constituents. I'm talking about business, labor, and other people who advised the minister that it doesn't make business sense to move the Galicia now because it will create problems. And this union had advised him too. But he went ahead and he moved and he said, I could get a vote, not a vote, a boat in the morning. And because of that, the sea bridge collapsed. What is the cause to Trinidad and Tobago? That decision would have caused the people, not the minister.
Yes.
Because when the minister or the government makes a mistake, its taxpayers are held accountable and responsible because it is our money. And the time has come, in our view, that when those kinds of decision is taken, right, is that the minister must be held accountable, right, for making those kinds of decisions. Because if that was a private enterprise, he would have had to resign his job already.
Yeah.
But he's still there.
Yeah.
And then you see, we have to start to talk about a new kind of politics, a new kind of reality where we hold people accountable. We cannot continue in a country where a minister, right, can, because, or a government, because they don't like somebody, they could get rid of them and say, let them do what they want. And we know that they are wrong. And then you have to go to court and you have to find monies to pay these people and them. And the taxpayer money is held accountable where we could be investing the taxpayers' money in something that is more productive. We are saying in the trade union movement, NATUC is saying that those days have to finish. Right? When those things happen, the minister must be held accountable, and whatever cause that arise from that bad decision, all right, he has to pay for that bad decision rather than the taxpayers, because people forget that the money is not the minister or the government money. It is the taxpayers' money, and therefore it must be spent wisely and productively for the betterment of Trinidad and Tobago and the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
All right. And in case you're now joining us here on PSA TV, I have been chatting here this morning with the head of the SWWTU, Mr. Michael Annisette, who is in Antigua. And we've recently been chatting about the port workers who stayed away from work last Friday. And they're back out, based on the several conditions, of course. So, Mr. Annisette, before you go, let me just ask you your closing comments.
All right, let me ask the General Secretary of the National Trade Union Center and the President of Seamen and Waterfront Workers Trade Union extend my congratulations to the newly appointed President of the Teachers Union. Let me assure that we in the National Trade Union Center, we are prepared to work with her because we understand that our issues as working class people are common. And we also understand that in order for us to move forward as the working class, we need to work collectively. I would have drafted a letter before I left to send off to her, congratulating her and asking for a meeting with her newly appointed executive so we can sit down and put our collective wisdom together in terms of how we can work and lend support to one another for a better working class. And let me finally assure the general public that the commitment of dock workers and the seamen and waterfront workers trade union is for a better port. And contrary to what people may say, that this move by the port workers was not an election move. This move was not a political move. The signing of the collective agreement was not, a political move. And our statement of the minister saying that the port workers, that the port, is one of the most corrupted entities. That is what the minister said. He attempted to say he meant, a few people. But the point that we are making, when you go and make those kind of statements, if there's corruption, there's a mechanism and there's a process to deal with corruption.
Yeah.
Charge the people. Do not make statements that will be interpreted, And then when you say a few people, when you try to justify it by saying you really meant a few people, who are the few people? Without having any investigation and without charging them. If there's corruption, the union will not support corruption in any form, shape, or fashion. But what we are saying, rather than making public statements to impinge upon people's character, you should do what you ought to do, Honorable Minister. Do the investigation and charge the required persons and let us move on. And that is all we are saying. I am proud. I'm a docker. I'm proud to represent the port workers. I know they are hard-working people. People do not understand the conditions in which dock workers have to work under in a 21st century, that we are still working under the 20th century conditions, and that is unfair. But the dock workers religiously went out and worked for the last 5 years. And now that we are taking a stand, we are hearing all kinds of implications. I trust that the minister will release the funds so that dock workers can get what they deserve. And in so doing, the economy will generate, because the more wages you have, better wages, your economy grows. And therefore, the excuses of, the country do not have money, that is not acceptable. Because we will have to do another program for NATUC and me as the president of Siemens and Waterfront Workers Trade Union to point out to the general public the amount of wastage that we are seeing in terms of expenditure that could have been saved and reinvested into the country, that could have been reinvested in wages, whereby the country benefits when workers have proper wages, because the workers buy goods and services. That is a economic, historical fact. But when we spend that kind of money on the sea bridge, and I want you to do the research so we could talk about it, you will see then that money for 50,000 people, and because of a mistake that was made by a minister, has now cost Trinidad and Tobago billions of dollars. And the port is left to languish, and the port is our gateway, as I say, to our economy, and is the arteries to our companies. And if the port is not operationalized, if the port is not efficient, if the port is not productive and sustainable, the people ultimately suffers, and that is the cry of the workers, and that is what the union is saying. And I want the general public to understand that enough is enough. We are talking about going in 6 years. We have been laboring, and therefore you need to recognize the worker service. And thank you for calling and Good day to Trinidad and Tobago, and I hope that you all have a good day. And as I always say, all right, I pray that the Divine Master will intervene and lend a hand to give all the leaders, regardless of where the leadership is, the wisdom and the guidance to guide Trinidad and Tobago to a better place.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Annisette.
Yeah.
All right, we've been chatting there with the president of the SWWTU, Mr. Michael Annisette, just a bit about last Friday's action where the workers at the Port of Spain port there, they stayed away to rest and highlight grievances, which includes, let me just read briefly, delayed wage talks and health and safety issues. However, as you've just heard, the workers are back out. This is PSA TV. We'll be right back.